The bent double beggar. The person I encounter most often on the road is old Ganpat, the bent double beggar. Every morning he hobbles up and down the road below my rooms, biding his time and suddenly manifesting himself in front of the unwary passerby or shoppers. It's difficult to resist Ganpat because, though bent double, he is very dignified. He has a long white beard and a commanding eye. His voice is powerful and carries well, which is probably why people say he was once an actor. People say many things about him. One rumor has it that he was once a well-to-do lawyer with a European wife. A paralytic stroke put an end to his career, and his wife finally left him. I've also been told that he's a Sid man in disguise, a rumor that might well have been started by Gampat himself. I was curious to know the story of his life, for I was convinced that he was not a beggar by choice. He had little in common with other members of his profession. His English was good, and he could recite passages from Shakespeare. His Hindi was excellent. He never made a direct request for money, but would enter into conversation with you, and remark on the weather or the innate meanness of the human race until you slipped him a coin. "Look, Grandpa," I said one day, "I've heard a lot of stories about you, and I don't know which is true. How did you become a beggar? How did you get your crooked back?" "That's a very long story," he said, flattered by my interest in him. "I don't know if you will believe it. Besides, it's not to everyone that I would speak freely." He had served his purpose in whetting my appetite. I said, "It will be worth a rupee if you tell me a story," considering my offer. "Very well," he said, squatting down on his haunches while I pulled myself up on a low wall. "But it had happened more than 20 years ago, and you cannot expect me to remember the details very clearly. In those days," said Gampat, "I was a healthy young man, with a wife and baby daughter. I owned a few acres of land, and though we were not rich, we were not very poor. When I took my produce to the market 5 miles away, I harnessed the bullocks and drove down the dusty village road, sometimes returning home late at night. Every night I passed a peepul tree, which was said to be haunted. I had never met the ghost and did not really believe in him, but his name, I was told, was Bipin, and long ago he had been hanged from the peepul tree by a gang of dacoits. Since then this ghost had lived in the tree, and was in the habit of pouncing on any person who resembled a dacoit and beating him severely. I suppose I must have looked a little guilty after a particularly successful business deal, because one night Bipin decided to pounce on me. He leapt out of the tree and stood in the middle of the road, bringing my bullocks to a halt. "You, there," he shouted, "get off your cart. I'm going to thrash you, and then string you up from the tree." I was of course considerably alarmed, but decided to put on a bold front. "I have no intention of getting off my cart. If you like, you can climb up yourself." "Spoken like a man," said Bipin, and he jumped up beside me. "But tell me one good reason for not stringing you up." "I'm not a dacoit," I replied. "But you look as though you could be one. That is the thing." "I'm a poor man, with a wife and child to support." "You have no business being poor," said Bipin angrily. "Well, make me rich if you can." "Do you not believe I can? Do you defy me to make you rich?" "Certainly," I said. "I defy you to make me rich." "Then drive on," cried Bipin. "I'm coming home with you." And I drove to the village with Bipin sitting beside me. "I have so arranged it," he said, "that no one will be able to see me. And another thing, I must sleep beside you every night, and no one must know of it. Should you tell anyone of my presence, I will not hesitate to strangle you." "You needn't worry," I said. "I won't tell anyone." "Good. I look forward to living with you." I was getting lonely in that peepul tree. And so Bipin came to live with me, and he slept beside me every night, and we got on very well together. He kept his promise, and money began to pour in from every conceivable source until I was in a position to buy more land and cattle. Nobody knew of our association, though naturally my friends and relatives wondered where all the money was coming from. At the same time, my wife was rather upset at my unwillingness to sleep beside her at night. I could not very well put her in the same bed with a ghost, and Bipin was most particular about sleeping near me. At first I told my wife I wasn't well, and that I would sleep on the veranda. Then I told her that there was someone after our cows, and that I would have to keep an eye on them at night. Bipin and I slept at the cowhouse. My wife would often spy on me at night, suspecting infidelity, but she always found me lying alone amongst the cows, unable to understand my strange behavior. She mentioned it to her family, and the next day my in-laws arrived on our doorstep, demanding an explanation. At the same time, my own relatives were insisting that I give them some explanation for my own rapidly increasing fortune. Uncles and aunts and distant cousins descended on me from all parts of the country, wanting to know where the money was coming from, and hoping to have some share of it. "Do you all want me to die?" I said, losing my patience with them. "I'm under an oath of silence. If I tell you the source of my wealth, I will be signing my own death warrant." But they laughed at me, taking this for a lame excuse. They suspected I was trying to keep the fortune to myself. My wife's relatives suspected that I had found another woman. Finally, I became so exasperated with their questions and demands that in a moment of weakness I blurted out the truth. They didn't believe the truth. Who does? But it gave them something to think about and talk about, and they left me in peace for a few days. But that same night Bippin did not come to sleep beside me. I was left alone with the cows. When he did not come the following night, I was afraid that he would throttle me while I slept. I was almost certain that my good fortune had come to an end, and I went back to sleeping in my old house. The next time I was driving back to the village from the market, Bippin leapt out of the peepul tree. "False friend," he cried, halting the bullocks. "I gave you everything you wanted, and you betrayed me." "I'm very sorry," I said, "but as a ghost you wouldn't understand what a man's relatives can be like. You can of course hang me from the peepul tree if you wish." "No, I cannot kill you," he said. "We've been friends for too long, but I must punish you all the same." Picking up a stout stick, he struck me 3 times across the back until I was bent double. "After that," concluded Gampat, "I could never straighten myself up again, and for 20 years I have been a crooked man. My wife left me and went back to her family, and I could no longer work in the fields. I left my village and wandered from one city to another, begging for a living. That is how I came here. People in this town seem to be more generous than elsewhere." He looked at me with his most appealing smile, waiting for the promised rupee. "You can't expect me to believe that story," I said, "but for your powers of invention, you deserve a rupee." "No, no," said Gampat, backing away and affecting indignation. "If you don't believe me, keep the rupee." Finally, he permitted me to force the note into his hand, and then he went hobbling away to the bazaar. I was almost certain he had been telling me a very tall story, but you can never really be sure. Perhaps it was true about Bipin, and it was clever to give him the rupee, just in case he was, after all, a Sidman.